Last week, a series of what were called worthies, a number of scientists, led by Global Professor of Environmental Change at Oxford University, Paul Behrens, wrote a letter to the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Christopher Luxon. God knows why, but they did. There was about 20 odd of them, saying that they were very, very concerned at the New Zealand government and its policies to do with agricultural emissions. They essentially said that the way in which New Zealand is treating methane, in particular, as a gas at the moment, is such that New Zealand is besmirching its international reputation and, far more importantly, destroying the world, or at least adding to the destruction of the world as a consequence. Christopher Luxon denied this. He was dismissing science or deflecting attention from the country's farming emissions. He actually said, what a load of rubbish. My point was very clear. Those scientists write to leaders of 194 countries before they write to me, because we are some of the most, if not the most efficient agricultural producer in the world. And if we didn't start farming here or doing dairying here, it would just transfer it to places that are a lot less efficient and, frankly, a lot less on the grid as well in terms of measurement. But anyhow, the government, when they first got elected, set up a panel, a scientific panel, to tell it how much methane emissions would need to drop to just level off global heating from methane, not reduce it. So in other words, the last government's policy was you've got to reduce the amount of methane, and that was going to cause serious and significant problems. You would have heard about the fart tax. Well, that's where that was going. And also, obviously, the payments overseas of between $4 and $24 billion were heading that direction as well. There was a lot at stake. And so the government set up a scientific panel to tell it, and one of those members of the governance panel was Victoria University Professor of Climate Change, Dave Frame. And they came back with a series of recommendations that did not obviously please the International Science Consortium who attacked the government last week, but came to a different conclusion. Professor David Frame joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. It's lovely to have you on the show.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me along.
Listen, you heard my introduction. There were a series of, as you know, international and obviously highly credible climate scientists from around the world who gathered to suggest that this government was not doing its job. But you were part of the scientific panel on methane, and I just wonder if you explain to everybody, why was that panel set up and what was it looking to recommend upon, please?
So we were given a very narrow brief, and that was just how much would we need to cut methane emissions by to level off warming at 2017 levels. And that wasn't something the Commission had considered, because the Commission interpreted their mandate as being what would the world as a whole and New Zealand need to do as a proportion of that to stay under 1.5 degrees. And they're two different questions. The question we were asked had actually been addressed in a few different places here and there. Miles Allen from Oxford and others had written on similar stuff, and we all got basically the same answer, which is that if the world goes kind of where it says it'll go in terms of emissions reductions in the next 20 or 30 years, you need about 15% cuts to mean that we level off warming at 2017 levels. If the world does a lot more than that, you need steeper cuts, and if the world does less than that, you need less steep cuts. But basically, they wanted an official sort of report that answered this question, and that wasn't industry funded, that was done by a bunch of scientists, independent of anything else that had happened.
Okay. Now, when you talk about the Commission, you mean the climate... is that Rod Carr's Commission that you're talking about?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yep.
And so what you're saying is that when they looked at methane levels in New Zealand and said they've got to be reduced and dramatically, and I've had Rod Carr on the show a couple of times, they were looking at the whole picture across the world, then averaging what New Zealand's contribution was and saying, well, it's got to come down to that to meet those international obligations. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, nearly. So actually what they did was the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, did a report 2018 or so saying, what does the world as a whole need to do to stay under 1.5 degrees? Now, the world isn't going to stay under 1.5 degrees, but they did this report, and in it was a table somewhere in that report where they just had some illustrative pathways about what different sectors around the world had to do. And agriculture, it was agricultural methane. The models they used to answer those questions, the models gave the result that somewhere between 24 and 47% emissions reductions were required to keep the world under 1.5 degrees in a bunch of models under pretty aggressive scenarios where everybody cuts emissions quite radically. And the table, this is really important, the table itself said that these the numbers in this table are not national requirements. They're not, they're just illustrative pathways. You kind of don't use these in policy. And the Commission went and did exactly that. So
why? I mean, why did they do that?
I don't know. You'd have to get Rod back.
You have to ask
him,
them. Okay.
Yeah,
Craig Stobo, we have an economic and fiscal reporter. He's chairman of the Financial Markets Authority, and we have him on as a regular guest, Dave. And he pointed this out 2 years ago. He says, I've got no... He makes the point, exactly the point you've just made. He says, I don't know where they got their figures from. Why did they do this? And I guess that's what the government asked when they asked you and a series of other academics here to go and have a look at it. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
We had, so the panel people, Bill Collins was on it. He's at the University of Reading in the UK. I was on it. We were both on the intergovernmental panel on the sixth assessment report, writing on these issues of how you compare greenhouse gases, because we work in that area. Just on the letter writers, they, not all of them, most of them aren't climate scientists actually, most of them are sort of environmental science professors and whatever, but many of them aren't experts in comparing these gases. So it was kind of an annoying letter in that sense.
No, good on you. Listen, the issue of 1.5%, you're quite clear now. We've missed that. That target's in the rear vision mirror. Is that right? There is no way you can get back to that. It's now a question of what's the next target. Is that right?
I think I think so. This is a point of difference between, say, the Commission and me. Is that I think that's blindingly obvious, but it's still in the legislation because the legislation, the 2019 Zero Carbon Act, said we are aiming for 1.5 degrees. That's a legislative target, and that is what the people at the Climate Commission think New Zealand policy is about. But it's basically really clear, I think, to everybody that we aren't going to stay under 1.5 degrees. So the question is, what do we do next? And other countries in the world will have to face this as well. Other countries that were kind of thinking, well, yes, we've got to do this to stay under 1.5 degrees. But very few of them actually hardwired 1.5 degrees into the primary legislation. So it's, we have to revisit this. We don't really have a great deal of choice.
Dave, can I just say, in the 3 or 4 minutes you've been speaking, I think you've clarified this issue magnificently. You should almost be your own video, your own 5 minutes, going into every school, every public place, and just pointing all that out, because that doesn't seem to be the message we're getting in a series of quite mixed messages throughout New Zealand media. Why do you think that is?
I don't know, to be honest. That's a really good question. I do think that there is a bit of a lot of people working in climate change are frustrated by a lack of action domestically, and they're desperate that we must, always push for more. And I think sometimes that clouds their ability to see, what is really happening in the world. So, I meet people who genuinely think New Zealand should kind of do everything it can, irrespective of the costs on New Zealanders, because the world as a whole has a problem. But you mentioned stamping our tiny feet at the end of the previous segment, and that's basically what they want us to do. But I think we just have to, the primary duty to me at least, of New Zealand policy in climate and every other area is to protect New Zealand's interests and to do what good we can do in the world. But that first bit is why we pay government people's salaries. You know, if
Frankly,
no,
you're wasted
if,
at Victoria University, can I say, Dave? You should be the Minister of Climate Change in the cabinet, just quietly.
well, I'm actually at
Um,
Canterbury University these days as well. Sorry, I probably haven't updated my stuff on the
oh,
website.
okay, so you're at Canterbury University. Oh, well, there you go. You've gone to
Yeah,
a real university then. Well done. No, good on you.
that's right.
Um, listen, all right, it's wonderful to listen to, but okay, let's just take the next bit. Somebody's just sent me this, and this is I'm interested from your point of view as being a rational climate change scientist. Michael, can you ask your guest, says Chris, why the climate change conversation always ignores, from a New Zealand perspective, the worst polluters like India, Indonesia, China,
Yeah.
etc., United States, instead of always focusing on tiny polluters like New Zealand? And it is a frustration that comes through from many of the folk that I broadcast to, but also throughout, I think, most of New Zealand as well. Is there a reason why we do, Dave? That we concentrate
Um,
on ourselves and we think we're going to save the world? In fact, God, people protest every day saying if we don't do this, the world will go to hell in a handbasket. When all those
yeah,
huge countries who are the major polluters seem not to be entering the conversation.